Here, and this is the 8th edition of Olly Ranks, where I'll be ranking Season 8 of the classic Doctor Who. Season 8 is John Pertwee's second season, and this season is very different to Season 7 because most of the mature aspects of that was in Season 7 have been toned down a bit, and there's more scientific plot heavy stories. With this show unfortunately not returning, we have a new companion in Jill Grant, and she makes a great first impression, and the newest addition to the unit family starred Captain Mike Yates. And this is also the first season to feature the Doctor's greatest enemy, another Time Lord named the Master, portrayed by Roger Delgado, and he appears in every story in Season 8. So if you're not familiar with how Olly Ranks works, I'll be ranking the certain stories or season or whatever in the series or show or whatever from my least favorite to my absolute favorite of the season. And instead of giving the overall season or whatever something out of 10, I'll be grading them out of. I'll be giving them grades instead of like usual scales of 1 to 10, with A star being the highest and F being the lowest. Oh, A plus being the highest and F being the lowest. So it is as follows: it says the rankings are A plus, which is the highest, A, B plus, B, B minus, C minus, C plus, and the list goes on. The ranks, in fifth place, my least favorite story from season 8 is The Claws of Axos. I was rather disappointed with the story. I was expecting the story to be one of the best of the Pertwee era. I think some actually do see this as the best of the season of Pertwee, but I unfortunately don't. And this was mainly due to the story's bad execution, and I did find this story to be tedious. John Pertwee and Katie Manning were great, as well as Nicholas Courtney, but I felt as if Benton and Yates, they didn't really do anything out of the ordinary and just blended in with the background. Delgado was great as the Master, but I felt as if the Master just being shoehorned into the plot because he didn't really. He did actually do a lot, but just his role felt a bit forced. And as I mentioned before, the story does look a bit. The actions were okay, but then, well, they're golden cells. But when they were like the original scary monsters, they did look a bit silly, especially with all jumping out of the jeep. The direction by Michael Ferguson was okay. It wasn't his best, but he could have done better. I think this is the last story he directs for Doctor Who, and so I gave that story a 5 out of 10. In fourth place is The Colony in Space, and I would say The Colony in Space is the hidden gem of this season. And this plot is rather interesting. It's a bit sad that this story is considered to be one of the worst of the Pertwee era. The acting, the themes of colonialism, territorial rights, and the political power struggles are great. I liked the Master in the story, but yet again, he does feel a bit shoehorned into the plot, and it's a bit obvious. This when he's actually mentioned in the beginning, and the Tamils were talking about how he stole the fall for the Doomsday Orb, and he doesn't actually show up well into the story's plot. Pertwee and Manning were great, as always, and it was nice to see them working as a duo without the presence of Unit. We get a very good side cast, a ruthless side villain in Captain Dent, and it was nice to see an interplanetary adventure in the Exile era, and I gave the story an 8 out of 10. In third place is Terror of the Autons. So, Terror of the Autons, it's basically a mini reboot of the Pertwee era, and we see the introduction of Captain Mike Yates, the Master, and Joe Grant, and all three aspects of what make the John Pertwee era very enjoyable, and it was really well done. The Master does get a very good introduction to the story, and I love how Joe Grant is introduced. I mean, she does get a great introduction when how she meets the Doctor, how she pretty much fucks up his experiment, and how she progresses in the story. Oh, it's very good. And then Katie Manning, I love how she acts like I think this is probably one of her best performances as Joe Grant, and I think having Joe there actually helped the Doctor grow as the third Doctor grow as a character, and having Joe working for Doctor actually helped her character as well. And we get the Autons here; they were quite good, and they were definitely scarier compared to their first appearance in Spirit from Space. But we do get some great scenes, such as McDermott getting killed by the plastic chair, and Joe trying to open the bomb, and the Doctor realized it was a bomb, and other stuff as well. But I think one of the main issues where the story actually lacked is what can I say? I think because I think it was a bit. I think the nesting consciousness was mentioned, but they didn't actually appear in this. They weren't really a major force. I think it was just the master controlling the autons, and that did feel a bit weird. Not to have the autons without the nesting consciousness, and plus the story. Some of the story was actually filmed in front of a green screen, and it did look a bit off-putting to say the least. But it's still a good story, and one of Pertwee's stronger stories. But I give that story an 8 out of 10. So we have the Demons. Demons is a wonderful, scary, hammer horror-esque story, and I really love Devil's End and all the surroundings they're in Devil's End, such as the Charge of Devil's Swamp and whatnot. Everyone that had a part to play in the story did so marvelously, especially John Pertwee, and he even said that this was actually his favorite story that he filmed, and I can see why. Jo was great in the story as well, and I liked how her character development is built in here, as her selflessness to save the Doctor, which actually defeats Azal in the end, was very well done. The Master was great, and I would say this is definitely one of Roger Delgado's best performances as the Doctor. Sorry, as the Master, sorry. In the Unit family, they were great as well, and they had some. And I think this is definitely one of the stories where the Unit family actually kick ass, and they do so beautifully. And I love Miss Hawthorne's character, and I definitely think she's one of my favorite side characters in all of Doctor Who. But I think one of my main complaints with this story was I think it's the conclusion was a bit rushed. I mean, yes, it does help Joe's character grow, but I think it could have, as I mentioned before in my review, it could have done with a sixth episode, so it can actually try and make the conclusion a bit less rushed and give some development into Azal. Maybe having the Doctor and the Master working together, trying to try and stop Azal, and then have the whole power transference of power scene, and then have Joe defeat Azal. That would have been probably a better situation for that. But it's still a great story, and we're definitely one of the best of season 8, and I'll give that story a 9 out of 10. And in first place, ta-da! The Mind of Evil. The Mind of Evil is a brilliant, a wacky, and a scary story. I really liked how it made the Master scary, because we just seen him in the Tale of the Autumn. You definitely saw how intimidating he was, but then the Master is even more intimidating in this story, and I think he does lose a bit of the intimidating levels as the season actually progresses. But I think this is probably the best Master story of this season, and I'd even go as far as saying the best Master story in the Pertwee era. Even though there are other stories as well, but I just love it so much. The acting was wonderful, the script, the direction, everything was done to perfection. We definitely get some great moments, such as the whole Master being seen, how the Keller machine was used, and there's one aspect I forgot to mention when I was reviewing The Mind of Evil. I liked how the Master's fear of the Doctor kind of came into play, and when the Master was in front of the Keller machine, I think we had the Doctor just a giant Doctor just like at the Master. It was a very funny scene as well, and I love how we get some diplomatic scenarios in this story, such as the International Peace Conference that units were looking after, and especially with what's her name again? Chin Lee, yes, with how she was being controlled by the Master, and yeah, and it was still quite good, and actually does borrow some elements of A Clockwork Orange. I have not actually familiar with that piece of material, but you can definitely, I think I did read up a bit of A Clockwork Orange, and it's still the similarities are there, and it was great, and it was very good. Pertwee was great here, and Joe was great here as well. I think Katie Manning even said that this was her favorite story of season 8, or her favorite story that she filmed for Doctor Who, and I can see why, because it's very fun to film, and it's just the music, everything. I just love The Mind of Evil, because it's actually my favorite, so my second favorite Pertwee story ever, and I never get bored watching this story, and I give The Mind of Evil a perfect 10 out of 10. So to conclude, season 8 is a great season, not as great as season 7, but it does manage to hold up on its own. But unfortunately, having the Master in every single story does kind of bring the season down a bit, especially including the unnecessary stories such as Close of Axos and possibly Colony in Space. Yes, and plus obviously the disappointment of the course of actions actually does bring down this season a bit. So I give season 8 the grade A. My next review for Doctor Who will be the jumper to his third season, season 9, starting off with Day of the Daleks, featuring the Daleks who we haven't seen since the end of season 4. So thanks for watching this review, the Olly Ranks, and please let me know what you thought of season 8, and let me know how you would rank this season. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel. Until then, see you later.